Hello, and welcome to this series of podcasts on Gordie Gillespie, who many of us believe was the greatest coach of all time. I hope that these conversations with players and friends of Gordie will help illuminate Gordie's greatness. But more importantly, I hope we can learn how Gordie did it. He was the winningest collegiate baseball coach of all time and the greatest Illinois high school football coach of all time. But we're not interested in his secrets of winning games, but his secrets of winning the hearts, minds, and the development of his young athletes. This conversation with Mike Spinozzi is riveting in that Mike was an All-American second baseman for Gordie and signed with the San Francisco Giants, and then rose to the heights of the business world. Mike shares with us his insight in how to apply Gordie's 10 Commandments in our everyday lives. Hello and welcome. And it is my incredibly great honor to have a chat today about Gordie with Mike Spinozzi. Now, folks, it would take me a half hour to do justice to Mike's unbelievable resume. But in short, Mike played second base for Gordie in the 70s at the University of St. Francis, had a stellar career, not only as an athlete, but also as a student athlete. Mike is still in the top 5 of many batting statistics all time at St. Francis. He was All-American. He signed with the San Francisco Giants, had a minor league career. And then he started what turned out to be an incredibly stellar career in business. He rose to become president of Sally Beauty. It's a corporation with over 4,000 stores, 30,000 employees. I can't imagine managing all of that. So, Mike, thank you so much for being here. I tell you what, why don't we start with you going back to when you first might have met Gordie or when he first motivated you?
Yeah, that's great. First, let me just say thank you. This is an honor to talk about one of my favorite people of all time, Gordie Gillespie. We moved to Joliet when I was 3. And as a student at St. Ray's, the natural progression was you were going to go to Joliet Catholic. The guys I hung out with in the neighborhood were 3 or 4 years older than I was. So when I was in middle school, they were already high school and talking about Joliet Catholic football and Lewis University, and this name of Gillespie began to come up at that time. My 8th grade year, 1973, is when I lost my dad very suddenly to a heart attack. And I think you can relate to this, Ray. When something like that happens that early, your perspective just totally changes. More of a long-term, more of a serious view. And authority figures in my life became very important to me. I think in some way I was trying to model behavior that I thought was exceptional behavior. So anyway, I go to Joliet Catholic and didn't play football. I was a baseball player. So they were having tryouts while I was still playing summer ball. So I never got a chance to play football. And I wasn't, that 4th and 1 collision kind of a guy. I was competitive, loved baseball, but the collision part of football was just never that appealing to me. So I never went out for football. Played intramurals at Joliet Catholic. So that was touch football down in the pit. And obviously Gordie ran that entire program. And it was also basketball. And what I remember is my sophomore year at Joliet Catholic, finishing an intramural basketball game and walking off the court, and Gordie walking up and saying, "Hey, Spin, great jump shots from the baseline. Really liked your footwork there." And I remember that because Gordie knows my name. Gordie called me Spin. I mean, I was just elated. I was on cloud 9 for like a week and a half. I was not a football player, but Gordie Gillespie knew who I was. So that was really the first time that, I had interacted with Gordie. So, you got a 4 or 5 year buildup of hearing all about him and, seeing these, achievements, one after another. And that was as he was on the precipice there of some really great things. I think you said 7 championships in 4 years or something like that. So it was just, incredible. And so I had 2 more years at Joliet Catholic, playing baseball on the varsity level for Roger Gifford. Roger played for Gordie at Lewis University. Roger had a nice career in professional baseball with the Washington Senators. Giff was a great guy, and he was really instrumental in connecting Gordie and I as far as going on to play collegiate baseball at St. Francis.
So when you get to St. Francis, did Gordie recruit you to play, or did you just go out for the team?
He did. He actually saw some of our indoor workouts prior to my senior season at Joliet Catholic. He came in and watched a few of the workouts, and I think he even invited us to go to St. Francis and work out there because they were putting together wiffle ball machines and nets and just maximizing every square inch of the facility. So Giff would bring the team in and Gordie would watch us. And I remember getting a note from him, a letter, saying he'd be highly interested in me playing at that time, the College of St. Francis, very complimentary about my athletic skills and quick hands. And I think you can help us and contribute, and, basically offered me a full ride at that point. I also had an offer at the end of my senior season for Lewis University, and was talking to the people at Southern Illinois and Eastern Michigan, who at that time had a very good team. But I ended up talking to Gordie right after our season ended, and I think we finished 5th in the state my senior season. That was the Billy Gullickson and Rick Colbert team that at that time went as far as any Joliet Catholic team ever went. And I remember Gordie being there, for the state playoffs. And a funny quick story: we lost the game after leading. The team we were playing blew a suicide squeeze bunt to try and tie the game, and I was going from shortstop to third as we got the runner in the rundown, and Rick Colbert, the catcher, makes a throw, and he's trying to thread the needle between the third baseman and me, both converging on third base, and neither one of us could get the baseball. So that run scores, and then another run scores, and we end up losing the game. But what I remember is Gordie after the game seeking out Rick Colbert and putting an arm around him. And we had a sense Rick was going to do some great things in baseball. And he got drafted by the Boston Red Sox in the 8th round that year, as a catcher, a tremendous catcher, had about a 12-year career in professional baseball. But I remember Gordie making eye contact with me and Pezzavento and others. But as soon as he saw Rick Colbert, he made a beeline over, arm around the shoulder. Don't know what he said, but I could tell in Rick's body language that he felt a lot better about things after talking to Gordie. But that's who he went to seek out. But I talked about authority figures, Ray, but can you imagine how lucky I was to not only 4 years at Joliet Catholic, but then to play for him for 4 years at St. Francis and basically be exposed to that day in and day out. And other than Jesus, is there a better mentor or model for life and behavior and how to lead and interact with people than Gordie? So I was very fortunate, accepted his offer, went on and just had a fabulous experience at St. Francis for those 4 years.
It's fascinating you say that because I mean, it resonates. It's almost like I have tingles when you say that, because I was lucky enough to play 8 seasons for Gordie, and Tony Delgado and I were just talking about this, that we also played 3 summers with him. So we might have had 11 seasons, but being with him day in and day out, it was life-changing. Yeah. And to hear you say that. But there's 2 things you said that I want to get back to, but your tremendous story about Rick Colbert and how Gordie sought him out and realized that he was in the doldrums, that this was a moment for Gordie to step in when someone is at their lowest. And how many coaches, when they make an error like that, how many coaches step in and start yelling at the player and think that that's going to motivate the player? And yet I hope that we get to that story that you told me a while ago about your son and the catcher and the juxtaposition of those two stories. But before we get there, there's something else that I want everyone to realize is that Gordie told me that in our 62 season, so many years, almost before you were born, we finished third in the country. And before that, in the 61 season, and before that, he had only been coaching baseball for, I think, 5 years. And it was essentially what we would say today, a club sport. And he was doing it for free. He did it just for his minor sports. He went to the president. He was the basketball coach at Lewis. Went to the president and said, we should have minor sports to bring more athletes in. And they said, what a great idea. You can be the baseball coach, Gordie, besides being athletic director and basketball coach, but we don't have any extra money to pay. And so after that 62 season, when we had the great Eddie Spezia, of course, and the great Tom Kennedy and people like that, we finished third this season. He told me he didn't have to recruit anymore because he had the best program maybe in Illinois. And coaches, high school coaches were calling him saying, please take my great baseball player. Yeah. But then he goes to St. Francis, leaves Lewis in 76. So you're one of the first athletes he recruits, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what year was that when you started?
That was correct. So I graduated in 77. So the fall of 77 is when I started with Gordie, and I graduated in the spring of 1981. So that would have been Ray, his second full year at St. Francis.
So think of that. He goes to a school that essentially was a women's college just a few years earlier, only had a few guys on campus. Boy, now that I think of it, you were lucky. You were one of the few guys on campus when you started. But now he's got to start all over. I can remember being so angry. I'm in Philadelphia when I hear this, that Lewis cut their ties with Gordie. And I talked to Tony. Tony said, Ray, it's okay. Gordie loves starting new programs. You were the linchpin. Who else was on that team besides? I mean, I think you had a couple players that came from Lewis.
Yeah, and Gordie being Gordie, he really encouraged his former Lewis guys to stay there. He didn't want to affect the program in a negative way. I think Tom Deeden at that time was named his successor, tremendous coach, did a great job at Providence High School in New Lenox. And, Gordie didn't want to dilute the talent base. So, he was real firm with those guys that he wanted them to stay put. And obviously they went on to, I think the year before we played them in 78, I think they finished third in the country, after winning the 3 national championships in a row. But we had Mike Altobelli, who came over from Lewis, one of the few. And then a lot of freshmen. Art Galley played shortstop. He was from Joliet Central. And we had an outfielder by the name of John Bebus, who came over from Homewood Flossmoor. And John ended up getting drafted. But John was, 6'5", and, he looked like the after picture for a gym commercial. I mean, he was just muscles on muscles and incredible athlete. And John had I think a good 10 or 12-year career in professional baseball, Ray, both as a player and a coach. And so he was just a tremendous offensive force, played right field for us. So that was kind of the nucleus. Dan Pesavento came over with me from Joliet Catholic, became one of the guys in the rotation. He was one of the 4 key guys for all 4 years. Another freshman, Billy Gimble, again, an Illinois product, came up and stepped up. So that team in 78, which ended up going to the World Series, was primarily freshmen and sophomores. Only Gordie could get a bunch of guys to overachieve. I mean, is that unbelievable? I think about the Delgado line. If you coach against Gordie, he'll beat you. But then if you exchange players, he'll still beat you. And I mean, that's in essence what happened when we played those guys at Lewis for the championship and the right to go to the World Series in 78. So just remarkable.
Well, this is going to take us 10 hours, I know. Tell me about that game, because when he was telling me about that game the first time, I couldn't believe him. I said, how can you recruit all these great players? He said, well, that's when he told me to call Mike Spinozzi. I said, well, who's Mike Spinozzi? Yeah. So anyway, that's when I first talked to him. He's telling me about this game. And he has Pesavento is pitching. I said, wait a minute, no. Is that the brother of the quarterback that you had at Joliet Catholic? Because I knew very little about Joliet Catholic when I started the book. So I had to read about it, and I talked to a couple of players. And Pesavento was the quarterback. When Gordie called the running play, Thayer up the middle, 4th and 1 against Rockford Boylan. And everyone in the world thinks he's crazy because there's minutes to go in a scoreless game on their own 20-yard line. And he goes for it, 4th and 1. And I said, so Pesavento was the same guy? So he was your pitcher. Now, Pesavento could have played college football somewhere, but instead, he decided to play for Gordie. And I talked to him, and he says, well, I wouldn't go anywhere else except where Gordie was. Yeah. So he didn't recruit from 1962 to 76. Just his fame. He wins 3 national championships. He wouldn't have had to recruit anything. He would be turning people away at Lewis. But he comes to St. Francis. And you guys go to the World Series beating Lewis. Yeah. Tell me about that game. That must have been fun.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, we had a very challenging schedule. Gordie would always say, if you want to be the best, you're going to have to beat the best. So we had probably as many Division I teams on the schedule that year, Ray, as we had NAIA. And the NAIA was basically playing in the conference, right? So, we played South Alabama. That spring trip, we played Florida State. I think South Alabama was ranked number 1 in the country, and Florida State was number 5. That's when Dick Hauser was still down there. So, every day, we went out to the field. We were playing the best competition, and by the time we faced Lewis, we were pretty fired up, and maybe a little too fired up. We were all pretty jacked because we knew what it meant to Gordie, and that took the motivation up to the next level. Mm-hmm. So Gordie's read on this is not the way to play baseball. So he went around and was very understated prior to the game, very soft-spoken, but very reassuring, went about it the way we went about any other game. Here's the lineup. Here's what we need to do. Reminded us of the teams that we had beaten that year, reassured us, and kind of brought the level down. All right, let's get about our business. Let's focus. Let's take care of the process, all the things that we've been doing all year long, and play the game. One pitch at a time, one hitter at a time, and go out and play the game. And they either started Rick Ramos or Bobby Hartman, 2 All-Americans who both played professionally and were just elite pitchers at the time. And we're starting Pez, who was, very crafty, had great command, a lot of movement. And, Pez would basically get you off balance. And we got I think an early lead in that game. And, these big bats would just keep coming up, and they'd get people on base, a hit, a walk, something. And Pez would get somebody to roll over on a slider away, or pull a changeup, and we'd turn double plays and get out of the inning. And it just seemed like every single inning, that's what was going on. And by the 4th or 5th, you could feel the momentum start to change. And, we really believed at that time that we could pull this off and we could do that. And it was a close game, but we were never threatened. We got ahead, we stayed ahead, and just played good, fundamentally sound Gordie Gillespie baseball, and, won that game, and, went on to the World Series a little bit later.
Yeah, I talked to Pesavento, and I just couldn't figure it out. I look back on it now, and it's almost like I would like to have put that game in the book, but I remember starting writing about it, but it's so hard to really give it justice that he goes from the top of the mountain, 3 straight national championships, in which he lost 1 game. He had a winning percentage of 93% in 3 years at the World Series. The statistics are, I looked up coaches that took their team 3 times to the World Series in 5 years, because I don't think anybody else did it in 3 years in that span. And the closest winning percentage was 52%, and he had 93%. Wow. Now he takes a bunch of guys who he's got to go out and recruit. He's facing, as you said, Tony said, the switch players will still beat you. He's playing against those players.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to put that in words. It's so difficult to say, look what he did with you guys and how he motivated you. But the one thing I'm discovering is that he did things that were the opposite of what we expect. You would you would have expected him to be like this. Come on, we got to win this game. We're going to the World Series, and you say he did the opposite. And of course, he never told me that. But so this is a revelation to me that you're telling me that how he approached that game calmed all of you down. Like that going for it 4th and 1. No other coach in the country would have gone for it, but he did. He did these things all the time. Now, to follow up on that,
Sure.
You were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, it reminded me, my last 2 years at Joliet Catholic, during the home football games at Memorial Stadium, I always made a point to get in the locker room because Gordie would allow that and listen to his pregame and his halftime comments. And it was the same way. He just had a very unique way of reading the team, getting a sense of the moment. Sometimes he was incredibly rah-rah if he felt like they needed to be lifted up and taken to another emotional level. And nobody could do that better than Gordie. Other times he could be incredibly clinical, especially with halftime adjustments, because he could see something and those adjustments would create a second half that the Hilltoppers would just dominate. And I remember a playoff game where he walked around the room, Ray, for it seemed like an eternity, just kind of doing this and clapping his hands and touching guys on the helmet. And that was it. But you could feel the energy in the room, just because of his presence. And he had a way of connecting with you, looking you in the eye and just kind of nodding like, hey, we're in this together. We've got this. You're ready. Those are all the things that run through your head when he does that. And you know what? You believed it because you know what you had gone through with him. You had total confidence that you were prepared. You had the best guy on the sideline, or in my case, in the dugout in your corner. And wow, what an amazing gift he had, that he could do that in so many sports. And it's funny, Ray, when I in my career, I've learned to progress in the business world. It's not so much your technical skills, what you know about marketing or operations or merchandising. It's really your leadership skills. And as brilliant as Gordie was technically, with the X's and the O's and the preparation, I believe his genius was really what he did psychologically. How he was able to motivate and connect and communicate and listen and empathize and all the things, like you said, he did a lot of things that are opposite of most leaders. Most leaders think they should be served and they should be issuing the orders and calling the shots and doing the agenda. Wasn't that way with Gordie. He was the guy supporting the team. It was truly servant leadership, with him. And as I progressed then, 32-year career in business, every leadership opportunity, basically had Gordie's influence as my own personal compass. Every time I looked at leadership, he was always the litmus test. Gordie wouldn't have done it that way. Gordie wouldn't have said that. Gordie would have handled it differently. So, again, what an amazing blessing and gift it was to have that and the benefit of all those years and, all of that influence to be able to guide you then as you move forward in your career in dealing with people. But I always say, people ask me in college, what was the best course you ever took? And I, without a hesitation, Psychology of Coaching by Gordie Gillespie. Because he got into some things that were not just about coaching, it was about life and human beings. And, he would talk about, hey, in 2 weeks, we're going down to Champaign-Urbana and I'm taking a bunch of kids into what's my speech going to be? What should I say? And we had a lot of those kinds of conversations in that classroom. Well, again, it wasn't him, giving us edicts and talking about, psychological doctrine. It was him listening and asking questions and challenging and guiding the conversation, as only Gordie could do. But I got so much out of that class in terms of leadership lessons and psychology than, any other class I ever took.
So this was an actual classroom class.
Actual classroom class, yeah.
Well, Gordie says, he said it often. I heard him in maybe 3 or 4 speeches. And individually he said it to me, that the greatest classroom there is is the ball field or the athletic arena. And I remember the first time I heard him say it. We were down in Maryland, and I was taping him and really kicking myself that I had this goofy little VCR camera, and I'm saying to myself, why didn't I buy a really good camera that I would have that? Because there are some videos, but this was special. Anyway, I remember saying to myself, well, Gordie, why is your classroom, I called it that, his baseball field, why is your classroom any better than my math classroom? Then Mikey explained it. And it was absolutely brilliant. And you just explained it just as brilliantly as he did, because there are things you can teach on the ball field that you can't in the classroom. And this resonates with me because the first time I heard this, and it was almost like something exploding in my head. I was talking to Tom Kennedy, and Tom said, you know, Ray, not a day goes by when I don't say to myself, what would Gordie do in this situation? And that's just what you said. Now combine those two ideas. Classroom's the greatest classroom there is, which you just defined. So he goes into the classroom and he reduces it to the ball field.
Yeah.
And then you just said, my whole leadership was based on things that I learned from Gordie. And yet he didn't preach to us, just as you said. So what are some of the specific things you picked up?
I think, a lot of the things in my leadership style that I tried to incorporate, number one, I think his preparation. He was so organized and so prepared. I think the other thing, I think it's the first commandment, Ray, right? Love your kids. For me, I think that's like the foundational commandment of those 10. I think you got to have that before you can really approach everything else. We talked about servant leadership, right? Servant leadership's going to put the employees, the team first, the organization first. And I think if you can do that, you're able to be open-minded, and you're able to empathize, and you're able to understand, and you take ego out of the equation. You take selfish motivations out of the equation. And you've really got to do that if you're going to build a winning culture that emphasizes trust and teamwork. It's got to be team first. You really got to care about people. I mean, if you're going to have judgment and make good, effective decisions, you've got to do it for the right reasons. So, love your students, love your employees, love your players. And, he would say that and everybody would kind of nod, right? Oh yeah, that makes sense. Love your kids. But wait a second, that's, in my mind, that's the ultimate one. That's because that's the foundation. And you got to keep coming back to that as you have a good day or a bad day. Why am I doing things? Am I doing it for the right reasons? Are we making the right decisions? Are we listening to people? So I think that part of it really helped form kind of a servant leadership in my mind, in terms of my own personal style. And then Gordie's way of using, compliments and recognition to motivate folks. I remember telling me, he says, the most effective motivational tool is a sincere compliment, and not a lot of people do that. I think they're afraid to do that. I think they feel like they're giving something away by doing that. And then you look at, I think about all the business books that have been written, since I graduated. And, there's a 1 minute manager, catch somebody doing something right. And that was a big, revolutionary concept. Well, Gordie got that. He understood that. So
did it every day. Yeah.
Yeah. To look for those things and recognize those things, going up to a Rick Colbert when he knows he's down and trying to connect with him and help him get through that. I mean, you have an opportunity to do that every day, if you're responsible for students or an organization or a team or whatever. So I think the concept of, recognition and being complimentary, I think were a big part of it. I think also the developmental aspect, Ray, having a part of your organizational DNA was to develop people, so we did succession planning. We talked about people from a developmental perspective. Can we give them a different experience so they can learn these things? Can we give them a mentor so they could be better development? I think those things I really learned from Gordie, because he was very big at doing that. He was very subtle in a lot of ways, but he understood, and he was always teaching. Right? I mean, for Gordie, development was nonstop. And here's another interesting thing: not only for the people that he was responsible for, but for himself. I could go several months without connecting with him. We'd have a phone call, and he was at a clinic, or he read a book, or he heard a speech, and he was on a different thought process in terms of throwing cutters, or arm slots, or release points, and he was engaged, and he was always learning, and not only developing his team, but developing himself. So I think that's another thing that helped me a lot. I always tried to read and absorb as much as possible to stay sharp as I possibly could.
Boy, that is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, here's another. I've got like 2 pages of notes already, Mike, and I won't get.
Well, we could do as many of these as you want to do.
Oh,
this is fun for me.
Here's another that I think will resonate with you. I'm going to put you on the spot here now, right? Because I want people to realize that this guy, Gordie, had ideas that were so beyond other people's. But here's an idea he told me. So he said that, and Sully just said the same thing. We had, and Tony said that we had this pitching coach, Heinsohn. What was Joe Heinsohn?
Joe Heinsohn.
Yeah, and he was the first guy, even though we had to drive 70 miles to get to St. Francis, he was the first guy on the field, and he greeted everyone with a smile. And he shook everyone's hand, and Gordie says, "You've got to do this. You've got to greet everyone every day." I said, "Gord, that's fine." But, so I had him, I figured. It's smart, right? I got him now. I said, "But Gord, you had 60, 70 players on your football team. You couldn't say hello to them and find out something about them every day." Because that's why I had eight assistants. We would meet before practice, my 8 assistants, and each one of them had a group of athletes, maybe 6, 7 athletes. This guy had the guards, this guy had the linebackers, etc. But each one of them had to say hello to every player every day and ask them, "How's life going?" And after practice, they would meet him with his assistants, and he went to each one of them. "How's everybody doing?" Not in terms of football, but in terms of his life.
Yeah.
I'll bet, because I picked up so many things from Gordie that I didn't even know that I picked up. I remember explaining, my youngest daughter, met Gordie twice. And I said to Sarah, I said, "Sarah, Pat Sullivan and Tony Delgado coached right with Gordie every day for decades. No wonder they're like Gordie." And she paid me a great compliment. She said, "Dad, you're as much, if not more, like Gordie than they are."
Wow.
And yeah, and I went, honest to goodness, that tickled me. But anyway, I'll bet you turned out to be like Gordie. I'll bet you did that at Sally Beauty, just organizing people that way, the way he organized his assistants.
Yeah, that's a great compliment. Thank you. I don't know about that. It's the standard I was always aspiring to. I know that. But your comment there about saying hello to people, I always made it a point to not only do that every morning, and that was everybody's desk, up and down the aisles, and say hello, but to know folks' names is very meaningful. I mean, if you're serious about building an organization that's really team oriented and built on trust, you've got to know each other. You've got to know how people are doing, and when they're not doing well, you've got to be there for them. I mean, you just can't go around, say hi to everybody and check that box and then move on to something else. I mean, this has got to be a real sincere part of who you are. And I think that was just part of Gordie's DNA. Again, you gotta love your kids. Are you familiar with Jim Collins at all? The author?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Stanford grad. Okay, so he wrote, I think he's known primarily for is it Good to Great,
right,
where he analytically talks about how companies move, and he's got that concept in there, Ray, called level 5 leadership.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Remember that?
Right.
I read that and I thought, well, he must have interviewed Gordie for this. And he said, and again, this is all done analytically. He said, these guys are generally very modest, humble people. And at the same time, they've got this fierce will and this firm resolve, but it's about making the organization something great. You know, he talked about pride in your team. And that's, you know, what Gordie was all about. It wasn't about him, but it was about making the organization great. And, you know, that was the model that everybody in the organization, you know, basically aspired to. And level 5 leaders are able to do that and enjoy tremendous long-term success because they built their teams and their organization that way. You know, they were really focused on achieving the mission and making the organization successful. It wasn't about them. It was about serving and making the organization successful. So again, you know, it's just funny. I read these things and how many of these revolutionary concepts I was, you know, at the foot of the master back in the 70s, learning these things on the field, you know, from Gordie Gillespie.
Well, I'm really hoping that all of these podcasts and the website gets this idea across, that who Gordie was, and we can all learn from them. And you, one of the first times we talked, you told me a great story that I think is the quintessential example of his second commandment, that is discipline. And so a coach and a leader, the CEO of a huge company, has to have discipline, has to understand that sometimes you've got to go to an employee and say, you've got to do it this way, in a loving way, but point out to them. My great example is that I was sharing this with someone. One day at baseball practice, when I was a senior, he was in the outfield line behind the plate. And he yelled out, "Coughlin!" Everybody knew a joke was coming. "When you graduate, you're going to put on 30 pounds in 6 months." And I proved him wrong. It only took me 3 months. But that has lived with me. I mean, I almost hear him saying that almost every day of my life. But my point is, you have almost a very similar story. And it's a hilarious story. So I think, if I remember correctly, you're a freshman at St. Francis, and you're playing a big game. Maybe it was South Alabama. I'm not sure. Yeah. And he saw something in your swing. Tell us that story, because this story, to the people who are listening, this has to do with what you were just talking about. In a loving way, you have to be able to.
Yeah. I was I was a freshman. We're on the Southern trip, and we're maybe just 15 games into the season, and we roll into South Alabama. It was being managed by Eddie Stanky, and they're the number 1 ranked team in baseball, so number 1 team in the world at this point. And I had made the transition the prior fall to second base from shortstop. I'd been a shortstop all my life, and Gordie and Paul Stevens, my first fall at St. Francis, helped me learn and transition to play second base. So I was starting now as a freshman against the number 1 team in the country in a position I had never played before. And throughout those 15 games, I think I was competitive, but I was playing not to lose. So I was a little tentative, you know, defensively. And I was in a little bit of a funk offensively, where I was kind of in between. I was a little late on the fastball, a little out in front and I just wasn't, you know, syncing up my loading mechanism. And Gordie saw that as I was taking batting practice at South Alabama. So we had a pretty good crowd, as you would imagine. The number 1 team in the country always had a pretty good crowd. And he called me off the field from batting practice, and he set up a tee near the dugout right next to a chain link fence. And he had me hitting balls, you know, off that tee. And he says, you know, you got to drive the ball the other way. I want you to think about this. And he was really getting on me, Ray, really ticked me off. The only time in my life I was ever angry at Gordie, and which is an important point. Gets back to his psychology. So we kept doing this and kept doing this, and we get in the game, and I'm ready to go. I'm jacked now. I'm ready to play whoever, wherever. I'm ready to go. And my first at bat's against a right-hander who's throwing low 90s, and he throws the first pitch and just paints it at the knees away from me, you know, 90-91, and I didn't swing at it. Right? I took the ball. I was late. My head coming back to see it go by. And so the catcher obviously recognized that. So he's calling for another fastball. Well, I thought he would. So I was looking out there for a fastball, and he throws it, and everything came through the way it was supposed to. Put a good swing on it, barreled it, and hit a ball out to right center field for my first collegiate home run. So I'm rounding the bases, and I'm hitting second, and I'm approaching third. And today most guys are like standing on top of third base when they're the third base coach, and you got all these choreographed moves you do and the jumping high five and all the nonsense. Gordie actually backed away several feet and became a fan and just stood there and applauded for me and just had this look of joy in his eyes and pride, like, there it is. I knew you had it. I knew you could do it. So, number one is him knowing I needed to work on a mechanical thing, but what he sensed was I was being a tentative freshman and he needed to light a fire, which he did. I'll tell you what, I never took another tentative swing after that. And it probably took me 10 years to figure out the second part of that wasn't just about mechanics. That was about me, really getting after it and playing the game aggressively again and not being tentative. But I'll just never forget the look on his face and how good that made me feel. He just stood there and didn't say a word, connected eyeball to eyeball, and was just clapping for me. And he just such a feeling of elation and joy rounding third base. And so that was hopefully the story you were looking for there, my friend.
Oh, well, I've never told you, but almost the same thing happened to me. I was a tentative freshman. And believe it or not, as I said, I was a 13th man on the 12-man basketball team, but things worked out and I got to play my freshman year. But I go out for baseball, and believe it or not, I actually hit over 500 in high school. So I figured, well, could college pitching be that much better? And we had another catcher, Ron Fernanski, who was 2 years older than me, who caught every game the previous year when he was a sophomore. So I knew I would share the time. And I think I went something like 0 for 25 to open the season. And Gordie stayed with me. So I was playing every other game. And I thought for sure that Ron would start catching everything. So we go down to play Illinois. And I'm saying, what is a school of 400 guys doing playing Illinois? But just as you said earlier, Mike, he wanted to play the best. So we go down to Illinois, and he says, Ray, you're starting. I'm saying, this is crazy. I'm 0 for 25. And he started me against this, obviously the biggest game. I don't even think we knew that there was such a thing as a World Series. But anyway, Gordie knew. And he came up to me, and you said earlier, he put his arm around me and said, Ray, what's happening? You're swinging too soon. You're overhyped by college pitching. You're swinging before the ball gets to you. You've got to calm down. So he told me almost the opposite of what he told you. Guess what I did in that game? I hit my first collegiate home run.
Is that right?
Changed my life.
Yeah.
But it also taught me, and I'm going to put you on the spot now. It also told me what a mentor, and I don't even think I knew the word back then, but I never forgot that experience. But when I became a teacher, I constantly remembered it. And I would go up to students and say, you've got to calm down. You're letting this little math paper get the best of you. That's why you're not doing well. So did you do that same type of thing, intervening like that for your employees?
Yeah, I think so. At least I tried to. And I think it comes down to just, can you be honest with people?
Good.
Read the, keep coming back to Ray's books here, Ray, I apologize, but the Leadership Challenge, been published probably 6 or 7 different times throughout the last 20 years, but it's all data-based, right? Based on actual field research and results. And the number one thing people always said they wanted from the direct supervisor was honesty, which surprises a lot of people. And it's always been number one. And so can you provide that? I had a guy that was a produce manager when I was very early in my career at Jewel Osco, running a store. And he was a tremendous worker, great work ethic, but he was not very good at ordering or delegating and tried to just do it all himself. So I worked with him, and I had some produce in my background, so I knew the technical aspect of the business. And month after month, we'd go through, develop a plan, and he just didn't get it. He was just basically out of his element. And I said, Joe, I gotta be honest with you. I said, you're a tremendous worker, but I don't think you're a very good manager. And you haven't been able to do X, Y, and Z. So you might be better off taking a step down, secondary level. And this is a guy with a family, so you're talking about less money, and not to mention, what an emotionally traumatic thing that is. I'm going to get demoted, blah, blah, blah. So he agreed, and we transferred him to another store just to give him a fresh start, and brought in a new produce manager who did a terrific job. And 2 months after this change, I got a call, and it was the former produce manager, wanted to know if I had a minute. I said, sure. Well, it happens he was in my store, came up to my office, closed the door, sat down with me, and began to tear up because he was so overjoyed. He was so happy. He thanked me. He says, you know what? As hard as I worked, I wasn't able to do it. He says, I'd work 14 hours a day, and I'd be driving home thinking, I still didn't do this. This isn't right, blah, blah, blah. My family noticed it. I was a mess. My relationships with them were strained and terrible. And now that seems like it was so long ago, because the last 2 months have been terrific. I'm the second man over at this store, and I'm doing well, and I'm enjoying it, and I've got quality of life, and I feel happy. And I just appreciate the fact that you were honest with me and gave me a shot at doing something else. And it really meant a lot to me, and reinforced the fact that we've got to be honest with people. You can work at developing people, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes they're not in the right position, and they need to be moved. And that's the right thing, not only for the organization, but as it turns out, for the individual. And that's not an easy lesson to learn and to practice.
Another great example of discipline.
Yeah.
It was very difficult for you, being a people leader, to go in and tell this fellow that that's a tremendous story. I decided Gordie didn't want me to write the book. He says, who's going to read anything about me? And so I had to work on him seriously. And the last thing he wanted in this book were his accolades. So on the website, I've got over on the left, on one page, we've got his 18 Halls of Fame.
Wow.
And in the other, I've got a list of his 31 awards, major awards. But he didn't want me to write anything about this. In the middle, I've got these statistics, like that 93% winning percentage at Lewis, and St. Francis winning their national championship. But he didn't want any of that.
Yeah.
What did he want it about? He wanted it to be about the Mike Spinozzis. He told me, call Mike Spinozzi, call Rudy, call Rick Ramos. And he would say, that's what I want the book to be about. And I said, Lord, what I want it to be about is not just that, but I want to find out how Mike Spinozzi took what you taught him and passed it on. Because we can tell coaches and managers that this is the way you should do it. It's not yelling and screaming and hollering at the players. Gordie, I'm forgetting who told me, but he went up to his players after a terrible loss. And he says, look, I don't know one player who wants to make an error, wants to miss the free throw at the end of the game. That's when you've got to step in, and at their lowest moment. So who was the catcher that you talked about earlier?
That was Rick Colbert to Joliet
Rick
Catholic.
Colbert. Gordie's there probably to see you and to recruit you to St. Francis. But what happens in Gordie's head? Gordie sees a young person who needs an arm around the shoulder. And he steps up and talks to Ray about this. And we could give you, there are thousands and thousands of examples of that. Pat Sullivan talks about how he gave up 3 straight hits to lose a game that he never should have lost as a freshman. The first person, he expects the whole team to come in and say, what's wrong with you, kid? When Pat was a freshman, who's the first one on the mound? It's Gordie. with an arm around Pat's shoulders, saying, "You're going to win more games here at Lewis than you can even imagine." Here, you're describing how it happens in the corporate world.
Yeah.
So I said, Gord, I want my last chapter to be pass it on.
Yeah.
For us to learn what Gordie was about and then pass it on.
Absolutely.
Why don't we finish with that tremendous story about your son, and tell us about what your son is doing now.
Right now, he's a graduate student at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and he's got one more year of baseball left. So he was a relief pitcher this year. We were just watching the draft. Two of his teammates have been drafted. Sam Bachman was the number 9 guy picked in the country. He went to the Angels, and the relief pitcher Jacob Webb was taken in the 14th round by the Red Sox. So
how proud are you of your son, man? That's tremendous.
Yeah. So he's excited. One more year there, and he'll get his master's, and then we'll see what the Lord has in store for him.
He's a scholar athlete like Dad. That's wonderful.
We're trying, but I, had the benefit of being able to coach him until he was about, 13, and then we turned him over to the club ball circuit. But I think he was about 11 or 12, and a few of the dads and I were a head coach, and we had a big game, a big conference game. I think was going to determine maybe who was going to be in first place or not. And we take a 1-run lead in the last inning. We're the home team. And the other team has got the bases loaded, and there's 2 outs. And our pitcher makes a great pitch. The guy tops the ball right in front of home plate. Our catcher does everything, Ray, that you would have done, right? Mask comes off. He grabs the ball with both hands, sets his feet, throws a rocket. Except the release point was a little bit high. So not only went over the first baseman, but it also went over the right fielder who's coming in to back up. So not only do all 3 runners score, but the hitter also scores. So, 4-run score. So now we're down by 3. And we get a guy out, and guys are coming off the field. And obviously I knew what I had to do. I had to get to that catcher. And maybe I should have asked Gordie what he said to Rick Colbert right after the Joliet Catholic game, because, obviously somebody needed to put an arm around him. So I was tending to our right fielder who had a little bit of a knee issue on that play. So as I'm getting up and coming back in, I noticed the catcher made his way all the way into the dugout and kept his mask on because he was crying. Didn't want anybody to see him crying. It felt so badly. So I knew what I had to do. And I'm thinking, okay, Gordie, give me the words here. So as I'm going in, my son walks in right in front of me, and he's got a bat in his hand, and he sits down next to the young man, and he says, "Hey, Austin," he says, "forget about it." He says, "We still got an at bat here. We're still going to win this thing." He says, "We need you, and we need this." And he hands him the bat, and you could see the little guy straighten up, take the mask off, and immediately, feeling better about himself. So, I added something profound like, "Okay, let's go." I figured my son had this thing covered at this point. So, baseball being what it is, we take the field, and we're hitting, and we get a rally, and we've got the tying run on third, a winning run on second, and Austin comes up to the plate, brimming with confidence, and digs in and takes the first pitch and just hits a rocket to left center field to win the game for us and walk it off. So we're all feeling good, and after the game, we're having our drinks and snacks or whatever, and I always used to ask the guys, "Okay, what did we learn? What are the takeaways here?" So. "Okay, guys, what did we learn from this?" And Austin shot his hand up. He says, "Never give up, coach. Never give up." I get chills.
Oh, now, I've got a literal tear.
He said it the way Gordie would have said it, and I thought, wow, my work here is done, right? But clearly he got it. And if there's anything you'd want kids to pick up from the game of baseball is resilience, because the game and life are going to knock you down at some point. You just got to get up and keep grinding. And he did. Great moment for him. But my son was able to deliver the message, which, meant so much to me as a dad, So, and again, right away, Gordie came into my mind as all that was going on. And
what's the 10th commandment?
Yeah, never give up. Never give up. So
you taught us that. And that's what we're trying to pass on to people. we're hoping people look at this and say, wow, I want to live my life in some small way, the way Gordie did. Because what you did is you clearly passed on these incredible, wonderful ways of living life to your son when he's young,
Yeah.
11 or 12. And he had the guts to go up to his friend and say, come on, you can do this. He put his arm around him, the way Gordie put his arm around you before the South Alabama, the way he put his arm around me, I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
There's so many times when he did it. So the name of the book is The Coach the Kid at the End of the Bench, which I still think is one of the most beautiful things he'd ever come up with, because that's what he did. So that catcher at that moment was the kid at the end of the bench, even though you have said he was your best player.
Yeah.
At that moment, he was the kid at the end of the bench who needs the arm around him.
Right.
So we every one of us, even the great Mike Spinozzi, who becomes president, the Sally Beauty, at some point needed an arm around him. I mean, let's go back to how you started, Mike. You started talking about the death of your father.
Yeah.
And we share something. You kind of alluded to it, because my mom died when I was about the same age as you. So I looked for Gordie in the same way. I didn't know I was doing that, but I remember when you told me that the first time, I said, wow, that's exactly what I was doing. So you and I needed an arm around our shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that catcher needed it. And you taught your son enough to go. And your son is going to learn these things through Gordie.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for that.
Well, thank you.
It is.
Thank you. And thank Gordie, just to extend the analogy one more time. I'm not sure the arm ever came off of us, Ray. I think it's always there and it'll always be there. Yeah.
Now you're going to get me crying. Oh, you're absolutely right. It's there all the time. Like Tom Kennedy said.
Yeah.
Not a day goes by.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are disciples of Gordie, and we've all our lives we've tried to do what he taught us.
Exactly right.
All right, my young man, I can't thank you enough.
My pleasure, sir.
How much fun was this? And I've got 2 pages of notes. We have to do this again.
Looking forward to it anytime.
Okay, great.
When you really get desperate, Ray, I'm available.
Knowing how many guys played for Gordie, over 2,400, and who think about him the same way you and I do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But I do want to do this again with you.
Please do. Yes, let's. Be my pleasure. Thank you.